Hello, this is the Geeky Gamer podcast, and we're coming at you from exactly everywhere in the world.
All the places.
From our satellite station.
Satellites.
Hovering above the Earth.
Whatever hurricane that may or may not be happening.
Oh, Jesus. We're watching it right now. In every time zone.
I think it's over. I think that if you lived through this hurricane, you're probably okay. If you didn't, you're not.
Jesus. Yeah. So what we're talking about today, is I actually don't really know. We're talking with Mildra, and Mildra's going to tell us everything. Everything that's possible to know. Mildra?
Yeah.
I hear you're a game creator and a streamer and a knower of many things.
Oh, no, we have to go back. You've skipped over a lot of things.
Bill, I skipped over the intro.
This is the Geeky Gamer podcast hosted by Ken and Bill. Just for your information, if you wanted to know what you're watching, all lowercase letters, Mr. Uninterrupted, the score, that's this noise. That is a Mr. Interrupt song. So Couchfire Media brings us art media production. As of this moment, there are no Patreon subscribers, but please fucking subscribe to our Patreon because we need money. Apparently, for us to make shorts, it's gonna cost like $180 a year to do some bullshit, which I disagree with, but shorts, you want to get subscribers, you want to get shorts, that's great. Something Bunkum Productions also helps. Trois Replay Productions. I hear some stuff about Nocturne. It's a short film. It's important. You should fucking watch it because that is important, as well as whatever. Geeky Gamer podcast. This week, Mildra is our returning guest. We have a returning guest. That's important. Returning guests means that we did it right the first time and they still like us. Thank you, Mildra, for returning. Appreciate it. Up to you. You finish. Who's our sponsor tonight?
Bourbon. That's who our sponsor is, Ken. Mildra, where we left off.
You want bourbon, you want scotch, you want beer.
One bourbon, one scotch, one beer, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How could I not reference that song? That song was rent-free in my head for years because you'd hear it at least once every night on the classic rock station in my area.
I've never had one bourbon, one scotch, and one beer in a setting, but I've come pretty close. Usually it's just bourbon and then more bourbon.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in bourbon mode. Bourbon. Like I don't know if you can tell. But
yeah. Yeah.
I'm going for it. I'm going for it. It's my vacation. I'm in vacation. I'm in vacation mode. I mean, seriously.
Me too.
I adhere to the ABA policy. Anything but absinthe.
Oh, fair enough. There's a couple cocktails that use absinthe. I don't know if anyone should really ever do it. There's one called a Corpse Reviver. Have you ever had one of those?
No.
It's not very good. I mean, if you like licorice, then you'll like it.
I don't like licorice.
Yeah, you'll fucking hate it. The other one is a Sazerac. A Sazerac, it's kind of like an old fashioned, but you rinse the glass with absinthe and you dump it out, or you spray it, and it kind of gives it a little bit of a fennel flavor or whatever.
Yeah,
or you could just drink bourbon.
I've been drinking Nate Evan Williams since 2:00 this afternoon, playing music. I mean, what do you want from me? Like, this is where we are. I want to know some shit about your like Final Fantasy Legends Edition tabletop role playing game, and I want to know how I can run it as a DM, because that is interesting to me. And this time on our Geeky Gamer podcast, I want to get to the like meat in the first, I don't know, 10 minutes instead of an hour and a half down the road. So we want to get to the reality of where you are as a person, Mildra. And I think that's important.
Oh, yeah.
Final Fantasy, tabletop, role playing. Who are you first? First of all, who is Mildra? Because you don't show your face.
No, I will not show my face. I'm not doing some face reveal stuff. I have never shown my face as Mildra, because I'm adhering to a very lucha libre like approach when it comes to the showing my face. Of if I am in public as Mildra, you do not see my face. Full stop. Period.
You're pulling a Santo. Pulling a Santo.
Yep, El Santo, Blue Demon. I'm well versed in the weird and wacky world of lucha libre, up to and including the fact that Darth Vader is a luchador, kind of.
A Japanese luchador. Okay, lucha libre.
No.
Tone forever.
There have been multiple luchadors who have wrestled with a Darth Vader gimmick in Mexico.
Yeah, one of my most amazing debacles in my life. I did a short moment of we put together. It was a lucha vavoom, so it was burlesque dancing and lucha libre. Santa was there, and a number of they had the chicken wrestlers and
you should know how it is. You should know how it is then.
Oh yeah,
if they're out in public, the mask is on.
The mask is on. If you show that stuff in reality, like you're done. You're done for. Like why even? They know who you are. There
are matches, of course, known as lucha de apuestas, or fights with wages, that the mask is sometimes the wager, i.e. if you lose it, you lose your mask and you don't get it back.
So I want to elaborate on that. I feel like that's planned, and it's kind of like WWE or F or G. I don't know where we are with the WW's wrestling, Worldwide Wrestling Foundation. I've heard
the whole it's pre-planned and all that, but that attitude seems to go right out the window once somebody's sitting down and actually watching, unless they're trying to be a fucking hipster. Never mind the fact that I used to be one of those people who would get annoyed when people would bring that up. These days, I'm not annoyed. I'm more disappointed, because when people bring that up, it's like, seriously, that's the best you got.
I apologize for disappointing you on this podcast. It'll never happen again on the Geeky Gamer podcast. Disappointments are not my intention.
But that's a whole other matter. Obviously, this is not my first rodeo on the Geeky Gamer podcast.
Truth.
For the few who do not know me, my name is Mildra. I am a gaming monk who does a lot of work all over the place, whether it be interviewing devs, whether it be reviewing games, whether it be doing deep dives into different core books like I was doing about an hour ago, or now I can add venturing into doing my own stuff to that list. The goal has always been showcasing what's out there. That has been my crusade for about 10 years. And I've continued that crusade. And I intend to keep going on that, no matter how many people I end up pissing off.
I mean, it's
I'm
how
fine.
you and I know each other.
Yeah.
Piss me off. No, from the Dreadlord Kickstarter.
You've
Yeah.
never pissed me off, Mildra. Like I find your commentary to be interesting and long.
There are certain folk who do not care for the fact that I have this attitude of wanting to bring in elements of video games or elements of manga and the like into the world of tabletop, because I've argued that that it's a medium where people can express their creativity with with a very, very open skill floor, because to run the game or even to make a game, you don't need to have extensive amount of programming or anything, or any kind of specialized training all that much. You just need to have a few tools and a healthy imagination, or unhealthy depending on who you ask. And a lot of folk, because of the fact that I want to bring in elements of things that aren't in that 70s style fantasy melting pot, they end up getting pissed off at me, especially when I tell them the truth. But a lot of people who self-identify as old school do not like me because and it's not like I'm going in looking for a fight, but I have expressed concerns that some people who have a self-proclaimed old school attitude.
What would be old school attitude? Because I mean, I would identify myself as an OSR style gamer.
That's
and
the other
Dreadlord
thing.
is OSR, or it's geared towards playing OSR too. You don't have to, but it's geared towards that.
That's the thing that's always tricky about this, is the fact that I can have a bunch of OSR guys in a room, ask them what OSR means, and get a bunch of different answers, and to me that's a problem. That because some might argue, oh, it's got to be based on white box for it to be OSR. Some will argue, oh, it's got to be based on Beckme. Some will argue it's got to be based on Moldave, and that's just with that game. But I've been very critical. The reason I've been very critical of the quote unquote OSR movement is, at times I feel like I'm watching a snake swallow its own tail, because of this culture towards conformity, towards sameness. Like a lot of people trying to replicate the same setup without using that as a starting point. And the analogy I often use is, over the last 5 or so years, we've had a resurgence in old school style first person shooters in the video game space. Boomer shooters, as they've been called.
Because you want to make it harder, because it shouldn't be easy. You got to fail sometimes, right?
And the thing is, with a lot of them, even though they're drawing upon old school shooters like Doom or Quake or Wolfenstein or whatnot, that's just the starting point. By the time that they come out, you can't say that it plays exactly like what it's drawing its inspiration from. It has its own identity. And I've come across a lot of OSR games that are just like BX with an extra coat of paint, and that puts me to sleep, because I've been there, I've done that, and I've gotten the T-shirt.
The thing is, like I see what you're saying. I mean, there was a really big fight over this, internet fight, back in the aughts, with the Forge and Ron Edwards and all the people that messed around with him.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
And I think you and I have actually talked a little bit about it. I would be more in the Ron Edwards camp when it comes to, I mean, I'm not talking like the Lord and Savior or something, but when it comes to breaking down and categorizing like TTRPGs and kind of like what they're trying to do, But the big fight, I think, has to do with a lot of contrarians. Like, people just really love to fucking argue and
they do.
And play devil's advocate instead of like actually having a real conversation. And I think it's one of the reasons why the Forge eventually ended, and Ron Edwards was like, all right, we've run through this argument enough. Like, you all aren't going to be convinced. And you went off and did what he does. I think it's playtesting games. When I say OSR, I'm not talking about white box, which I kind of understand. From what I understand, I would love for you to explain it a little more. It's just old school D&D, right?
Yeah,
Like
the problem is what counts as what counts as old school,
like first edition.
Yeah, but even with that, you've got a bunch of different branching points. You have the different edits. You have the original white box. You have you have BECME. You have BX.
But like I think that's such a fucking Reddit style 4chan-y argument that people are playing if they're actually going that direction. Like, that's not what OSR is. It's really missing the forest for the trees. Like, if somebody's like, no, this isn't white box, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's like going to a punk show and people arguing about, I don't know, I can't believe you have zippers.
It's funny. It's funny thing
yourself. It's like, what the fuck?
It's funny that you bring up punk, because one punk album that I often bring up whenever it comes to this whole tradition for its own sake issue that crops up in some circles is The Shape of Punk to Come by Refused. It's a really good album that came out in 2000. But because they were going a bit experimental and not just using the same set of instruments or the same set of musical styles, some punk magazines refused to review it. Even though nowadays everybody treats it like a masterpiece, that wasn't the case at the time.
Sure.
And it did lead to a chain of events that led to Refused breaking up, and then they got back together a few years later because the itch is always going to come up.
Yeah,
but that's a whole other kettle of fish.
So, what? How would you define OSR? Old school Renaissance, old school revival, for people that don't know what we're talking about.
So,
how would you define it?
I would the simplest definition is the idea of doing old school style play that leans heavily into improvisation, leans heavily into GM call and so on, using the organizational and presentation tools of modern technologies. That is it at its most simple. My problem ultimately came from when it became an identity instead of just an idea. And I think for a lot of people, it's an identity. And with it being an identity, they become too attached to that identity.
I see.
One of the mantras that I have in my temple is fans, not fandom. I am a fan of various works, but I do not consider myself part of any fandom.
So you're not a Trekkie, you're a Trekker. I read you.
Yeah.
I read you.
Although whenever it comes to the Kirk Picard debate, I'm that one guy who has to say, no, Sisko's the answer.
Sisko is the bomb.
Yeah,
but Sisko's not Picard.
Good. It's good. Feels.
I mean, listen. Sisko's pretty cool. Although Sisko, most of the series, he's not a captain.
No, he's a commander. But when it comes to leader characters throughout Trek, he has consistently been one of my favorites, if not the one that I've connected with the most.
I think Sisko's. Go on. Sorry.
A lot of it is in part due to him being extremely passionate and extremely flawed.
There you go. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Is he flawed?
Maybe.
No, I mean, hold on.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
He's not a good guy.
He's
not a bad guy.
I'm gonna
He's
argue
not a
with
good guy.
I'm gonna argue with you because I don't think he's flawed. I think he's just human. I mean, he's just feeling. I mean, he's going through a process. I mean, I think it's not an error of what he does. He is empathetic.
I don't mean flawed in like there's something like in terms of quality of characterization or something like that. More in that he has very very human flaws. He's very competitive. He doesn't handle losing well. He does not suffer fools gladly. That
He's vengeful.
Oh, he very much is. Then
He's straight up vengeful, and he breaks the rules in a way that is not like condoned by the Federation.
Yeah, but
it's not even condoned by himself.
But when he does break the rules, you agree with it?
No.
I don't know.
I
mean,
understand
he
it.
straight up destroys a couple planets.
I understand.
Straight up.
Yeah,
I understand. I understand the mindset that leads one to that end. But I'm not supposed to empathize or agree with it, and neither does he. I mean, you have that whole episode in the Pale Moonlight where he's all but using as a framing device him talking on his log almost as a confessional, as if he's trying to talk himself into thinking that he did the right thing with the multiple crimes he did.
Right.
Like that it ending with "I think I can live with it." The way he says it is more like he's trying to convince himself that. And
DS9 gets a lot of shit, and the thing is, there's not a single bad episode.
I would say it gets a lot of. I'd say it gets a lot of shit from people who, hold the attitudes that Roddenberry had as some sort of gospel, which is kind of missing the point.
Well, yeah, I mean, Roddenberry, there's an optimistic view of humanity, which Star Trek should have, in my opinion, and I think Discovery really misses the mark on it. However,
I didn't watch any of Discovery.
It's fucking awful. But
so I've heard.
The thing is, TNG, when Roddenberry was alive, goes into the dark side of what happens when you're in paradise, which is the Earth, and you fall through the cracks. What happens when you disagree?
The funny thing about that
really deals with that.
A lot of those episodes happened when Roddenberry got kicked upstairs. Like the first couple seasons of TNG, he was heavily involved and was overcompensating for the movies, essentially. And I'm talking stuff like Code of Honor and the like,
right,
where he had this idea of trying to present the true vision of what Trek was, especially when he was such a vocal critic of how he felt Starfleet was appearing militarized in the movies, especially Wrath of Khan.
Sure.
Yeah.
But before you get to beyond that, I wanted to come back just a little bit. To me, the TNG stuff is Gaza. We are on the edge of a world. I think I just hurt Bill in a way that maybe he won't come back. But it is the forefront of a war that there's a lot of details in there, and I think that those details of why it's not solvable are what DS9 is about, and why we might be in a forever world war, because it's you've got religion, you've got devout people who are in a way and it's like, how do you come back from that? I feel like I feel like I said some stuff and that's where we are, but
yeah,
that was my insight into DS9 from my
I'll wrap it up with saying that one person's vision, regardless of how much of a visionary they may be, can only go so far. And when there is a phrase that we use in the temple called "design by gospel," where things are being done because that's always the way that they've been done, and that creates stagnation. That can create problems. And if you want the ultimate example of that, look at the way the Prime Directive got treated from a decent idea and something to kind of fall back on in certain circumstances to a dogma.
I don't disagree with you. I think that's an interesting concept, and it just highlighted the problems that you have to go through. They didn't solve anything. They went to war. I mean, the biggest war ever was in DS9. That was the biggest war, and they didn't resolve it by negotiating. They resolved it with weapons.
But before getting back on the rails.
Yeah, no, I'm off the rails. I'm with you on off the rails. Sorry, let's come back.
Yeah. So the approach that I take when it comes to how I look at TTRPGs is akin to a tailor. There's a wide variety of games out there, and not every game is games are for everybody, but not every game is going to be for everybody or every table. And what I try and do whenever I've done reviews or the like is assess what kind of person, what kind of group would I recommend something to, and how easy is that recommendation. So instead of doing a numerical scoring system, which I haven't done in the better part of a decade, I do a tier system. And the more asterisks I have to put on that recommendation, the lower on that tier system a given game is going to be. The tier system from highest to lowest goes strongly recommended. So I can recommend this very easily with little, if any, caveats. Recommended. It was pretty good, but there's like one or two things that keep it from hitting the top. Below that is playable. It's good, but you might have to do some house ruling to make it fit with a given table. Caution, where you're gonna have to do some extensive house ruling to make it work. And avoid, where I cannot in good conscience recommend it unless you really, really want to mess around with house ruling the hell out of it to the point where you're a backseat designer.
Well, the obvious question is, what is Dreadlore?
I would have to give that some thought.
Well, you haven't played it yet.
Yeah, I would need some time being a bit hands-on with it in order to assess that. I will also
you want to play some time?
if my schedule will allow me, I'm certainly open to it.
Yep.
The key thing is I should also note that proper navigation is something I am very, very big on. Like having an index, having bookmarks, having a table of contents that's accurate, that sort of thing.
Well, we're looking at your guys' PDF briefly. The digital version, at least, I respect the hell out of it because it looks like the TOC is the table of contents is. I know you know that. I'm telling it for other people. Is linkable. It looks like it's very well laid out, and that's what I tried to do with my book. And the reason I bring up Dreadlore is one, to plug it, but two, that takes a lot of effort.
Oh yeah.
To actually make that right, that's hours and hours. And even when you're using the automated thing, that's a bitch. So
Yeah,
I really respect that.
I know for a lot of people they hate doing that because of how much of a royal pain it is to set up. But I look at it kind of like getting your wisdom teeth removed or getting your tonsils removed. It's gonna suck, but you're gonna be better off for it in the long run. Or getting your shots or something like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, how long is that book? How long's the PDF?
413 pages.
Yeah. So and what's the size on it? What are the dimensions?
It's a standard A4.
So 8.5 by 11.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's like a D&D book, like standard gaming book. Dreadlore is 7 by 10, so it's executive, which makes it thicker. And it clocks right about 500. If you put it in terms of like a normal A4, it would probably be maybe 300, which, as just an aside for anyone who cares to know, when you play Dungeons and Dragons and you have the monster manual, the player's handbook, and the dungeon master's guide, which is what you need to play D&D, you're talking about 1 million words plus, which each one of those books is around 300 pages, but it is a huge game. So being able to fit a game in 400 pages, which at that time, it's probably around 300,000 words, I'm just going to guess. Is that about it?
Yeah. Now, I do want to put a caveat. The PDF that you have is a vertical slice demo that does not contain everything.
Okay.
It only contains like 20 monsters out of the 200 that are in the full text, and it does not have chapter 11 within it, which is the advanced rules.
So you have a monster manual in the core book.
Yes. Not only do we have a monster manual, we have a monster creation system.
Oh wow.
In the core book.
Is it D20 based?
It is, because I suppose I'll get into the origin story.
Yeah, please.
Because so a little over 3 years ago, I did an episode of Geek
3 years ago,
where I had tooled around with the idea of taking the jobs in Final Fantasy and adapting them to the track system in Legend System. Now, Legend System, if you're not aware, was originally started as an entry in the Test of Spite Arena contest in Giant on the Playground, that evolved into its own thing. Basically, the folks at Giant on the Playground saying, okay, how would you do, if you were going to redo 3rd edition, how would you do it? And Legend System was one of the entries. It spiraled out from there, and it kind of became its own thing. And there's a long history of games that have a house ruled themselves into existence.
Let me pause you really, really quick to just unpack some of what you said, because we're talking pretty deep TTRPG lore right now. Okay, so first of all, I'm gonna let you do it because Mildra knows a lot more than I do about games. All right, so to start point, Ken, you've been gaming for like a year or two. What did you understand of what Mildred just said? And then that will allow him to answer some questions. It seems like this game is based off Legend, which is based off 3rd edition D&D, which is a D20 system. Arguably where New School comes around. Arguably. Go.
I want to clarify that I've been gaming since I was 16 years old, and I'm 47
like 2 years
now.
Ago.
So
it's like 2.5 years ago.
I've definitely thought about games for a long time. I think what Mildra has done and the insight that I have is created something that is more in depth, that allows us to journey deeper inside a world that needs some more description, some more adjectives and nouns and artwork, and what he has come up with is a way to delve inside a world with some insight into fantasy and creating more than, like, if you've read the Dungeons and Dragons manuals, it leaves a lot to the imagination. And so what Mildra has done is kind of gone deeper into this, because like, I get frustrated. I've got all the D&D core books, and it's like, what else is there? And this is the what else is there. Am I wrong?
There's a lot that's out there, and I'm standing up as I am. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants that came before me. That's why I went into that background setup. But after I did that episode of the Geek Watch podcast all those years ago, the idea ended up sticking in my head. And then I started expanding it. I started talking with Xanatrix, who you guys are familiar with.
Absolutely.
And him and I started working out the text of things. Then I ended up getting in contact with the memory slot, aka Matt, and who I was already having some back and forth with, because a friend of his was working on his own Final Fantasy themed tabletop that unfortunately didn't go anywhere. And then he joined. I was already working with him when it came to designing a character sheet. And then when the project that he was working on didn't go anywhere, he was like, well, I got all these assets and nothing to do with them. So you mind if I join in with you guys and send it and have you guys use them? And then through that, I had shared some of the stuff that I was working with another person who's been on my show, Nami Nomi, who between this is also working on a mecha themed game called All Systems Go. And through these chain of events, that led to the vertical slice that you have in front of you. And in addition to that, I had contacted June Chris, who's an artist that I've worked with, who has done several designs for me, to design the race and class art that's within the book. I'd also worked with another friend of mine to do a couple spreads of different weapons for that part of it. But once I realized that I was going to be making this into a full-on game, Zan and I, who's the editor-in-chief and also the co-writer, had sat down and we had gone, okay, if we're doing this, we need to nail down our pillars. We need to nail down the things that are the Rome in that phrase, all roads lead to Rome. And we ended up coming up with a few pillars, and in fact, right in the first chapter, we outline what our goals are, what our philosophy on what the difference is between video game and RPGs and tabletop RPGs, the history of different Final Fantasy TTRPGs that we are drawing inspiration from, and key to this is the three pillars that we design, that everything down to the smallest detail is designed around. Anytime we added something in, we were always asking, does this fit within our pillars? Every time. And those three pillars, which is on page 7, are mythos over setting, customization is king, and the 4-phase structure. Now, mythos over setting was a watchword that we had used because we were not just, first off, we're not trying to write fantasy. We're trying to write Final Fantasy. That franchise has been around for a long time. There's been a bunch of different games. When I would announce to friends that we were working on this, they would be like, okay, what game in the series are you designing it around? I wanted something that could be just as viable regardless of what generation you draw from. Because a lot of the predecessors clearly draw from like the Super Nintendo era. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. But I know that there's whole generations who have more of an attachment to the PS1 or PS2 eras.
This would be like Final Fantasy 7 or with regard respectively, Final Fantasy 3 versus 7, right?
Sure. I ended off on Final Fantasy 2. I beat the game and wanted to play more Final Fantasy, but then playing video games stopped being something I did. So
the point is that I wanted this to be a Final Fantasy TTRPG, not a Final Fantasy TTRPG that just covers the ones I happen to like, because it isn't just about me.
Yeah, it seems like you go really into depth about the world, and this is a Final Fantasy structure that allows you to go into the AD&D setting or a lot of other different settings and maybe be able to incorporate the world of Final Fantasy into whatever TTRPG that you're interested in.
I've been frustrated with certain games that claim that they can be used for all kinds of fantasy, but very much skew towards a particular subgenre. It's a case of you got to pick a fucking lane. You're either setting agnostic or you're not.
Yeah.
You cannot play half-seas.
I don't know. Can you explain that a little bit?
So I'll use D&D because this is what's often brought up. I have heard when I started, I've continued to hear this in one form or another, even to this day, that you can use D&D to run virtually any kind of fantasy. That is the wording that gets used towards me. And then you look at the way classes are designed, the way races are designed, the way equipment is designed. Hell, even the mere existence of exotic weapons in certain editions contradicts that. It very much is skewing towards a fantasy melting pot built around Western Europe. A lot of that is just due to what Gygax and Arneson happen to be fans of, and I'm fine with that.
Now hold on a second. Oriental Adventures was.
Did you say Oriental Adventures?
I like Oriental Adventures,
it's
but
it's a third edition book.
No. It was an AD&D.
Was it AD&D?
Yeah,
it's also a third ed. That's how I know it. And
the third ed I don't.
And it's kind of an infamous book, actually.
Yeah, it's infamous, especially due to certain pearl clutchers. But it was an attempt, and with the original version, it's a case of it's important to understand that a lot of what we know now wasn't as known at the time. So,
well, no one knew anything about China. I mean, they still call it the Orient, for example, and they weren't even talking about China.
Yeah, it sounds racist.
They
weren't trying to be racist, but
no, I'm not saying it. I'm saying it in the ephemeral bull.
Yeah,
right.
There was a whole article that I saw about how modern editions don't need 8 Oriental Adventures, and I'd argued the name. I could take that or leave it because it's not very descriptive. But the concept of Karatur, which was the setting that was in that book,
right?
I would say that is necessary because I still have people who have this idea that in order for something to be fantasy, it has to be within that Western medieval pastiche, that Western European pastiche. And I have a feeling that part of the reason why something like The Witcher became as popular as it was is because it is very unabashedly Eastern European medieval. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that pastiche. The problem ends up coming when you try and treat that as the default for something to count as fantasy.
What's
And
ironic about that? Go on. Sorry, finish it.
I remember people arguing that Planescape should be considered science fiction and not fantasy.
What?
Yeah, there were people who were saying that to me with their whole ass, their face and their whole ass.
And that's a clip right there. that's a YouTube short.
Saying that with their whole ass that should be considered that.
10 Eastern time.
I had said the only way it should count as that is if your idea of fantasy begins and ends with, again, that Western European medieval pastiche.
Well, what I was going to say, which is now tangential, but the irony being, the Lord of the Rings is the base for a lot of this stuff, at least in the minds of most when people think fantasy. The minds of most in the content that we generally consume. They're really kind of talking about derivatives of Lord of the Rings. And ironically, Tolkien made that because there wasn't that. And there are letters of him, complaining and being like, when I talk about a dwarf, when we think of dwarves, we think of, barrel-chested Scotsmen, right? With beards and shit. But he's like, when I say dwarf, people think of, tiny dwarves that run around Ireland or whatever, or Germany or whatever. He's like, people, there's so much inertia, and no one will actually just read and accept that an elf is not what they think it is. So even Tolkien, this granddaddy of what we consider fantasy, right, fought this fight, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, and for me, because the reason why I get on that is, I think if depending on the type of fantasy that one would want to emulate, that whole thing of using this game that claims to be able to do all kinds of fantasy but in practice can't, ends up creating a bit of a disharmony. And for me, I've been to several places, and I'm like, if somebody's brand of fantasy is more in the vein of more Eastern affairs in terms of how they got into the concept of fantasy, then it's not something that's going to serve them, and that's the reason why I go with that Taylor approach.
Well, there's a difference. D&D literally has settings and is a setting. I mean, arguably Greyhawk is the setting for D&D, but the original D&D, it was based on what you said, an amalgamation of European fantasy, and specifically Lord of the Rings.
Which I'm fine with, and I'll end it with, don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining.
D20 being a system is setting agnostic.
Well,
right?
it claims to be. And
I mean, my hatred for D20. Like I'm playing devil's advocate here to a degree, yeah. But what I'm getting at is, I mean, when you get in, what I'm getting at is the math of D20 is better for certain kinds of games, and so is D6, and so is D10, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you're talking about a flavor of a game, regardless of the setting. But that's a whole black hole we can avoid.
The point is, the mythos over setting approach that we took was we are taking the recurring elements, the recurring themes, and the like, and treating that as a sandbox that one can build around as that table sees fit. We aren't writing a core setting, because as far as we're down the road, we've considered the idea of writing brief mini settings that we call not full on splats, but like zines that we're calling shards. Like shards of a crystal.
Yeah.
The idea being they would be the bare foundation of a setting that a table could expand upon as they see fit.
That's a very OSR thing to do, by the way.
Now, the second pillar, customization is king. A lot of that is represented in the way character creation works, the way monster creation works, the way setting creation works. All of that it is on some level customizable, even all the way down to things like magic items. We have a sample magic item list, but there is a system for creating magic items within the book.
That'll be interesting to see, because that's essentially what 3rd edition tried to do, as opposed to 2nd edition in Dungeons and Dragons.
I can assure you that the magic item system we have is far simpler. The same thing goes with weapons and armor. Instead of having a set weapon and armor list, we have a tag-based setup so that people can create their own.
Is this a level-based game?
Yes.
Usually D20 is, but it's just okay.
Yeah, the D20 is part of the core mechanic, but you're not going to be able to bring characters from like D&D 3.5 or 4 or 5 into this without making some heavy customizations. For the same reason you couldn't take an AD&D character and put it into Rollmaster all that easily, even though Rollmaster was rooted in AD&D.
Okay, can you give me or go ahead to your 3rd pillar?
Now the 3rd pillar is the 4-phase structure. And this is essentially the spine of an adventuring structure that we have instead of having things like quotes, because we weren't trying to take like D&D tropes and try and put them in Final Fantasy. We were like, these are the motifs of Final Fantasy. How can we emulate that in an RPG? That was our mindset. It's the mindset that you see a lot more often in the TTRPG scene in Japan, or in the indies over here. So doing things like a full dungeon crawl or a mega dungeon, that was never in our plans. If somebody else wants to do it, they're free to. But I've been very critical of the term JRPG, most for various reasons. I did a whole video on it a while back called the illusory genre. But when I looked into the history of what I call console style role-playing video games, I noticed a pattern, especially when I studied both Dragon Quest and how wizardry played a role into the development of Dragon Quest. And that was this pattern of what I called field, town, dungeon, repeat. I'm messing with the order, but the point is that there was that loop. And we decided to have it that a module, a storytelling arc, what have you, is built around 4 arcs. Preparation, i.e., you're in town, you're getting the equipment you need, you're doing the setup. Exploration, you're out in the field, you're starting to pursue a quest. Encounters, the full-on conflict, usually the culmination of that conflict. And then downtime, where you have that cooldown period. This is loosely inspired by a narrative motif that you see in a lot of Asian media called Kisho Tenketsu. Introduction, development, twist, conclusion. That's the Japanese name for it. There's other names in China and Korea, but I'm more familiar with that name. And this is something that's been used in poems, been used in short stories, even been used in level design. I remember Miyamoto outright saying that he had used that format for some of the level designs in some of the Mario games.
Right.
And those three things are part of the structure that we built everything around. And that was before we started writing any of the classes or anything like that. We wanted to have a core set of pillars that we could always fall back on.
Right. Yeah, that sounds good. And I mean, like, in capital good. Most of my conversations with my buddies who are game creators, that usually are into OSR, to be completely honest, because I think that OSR sort of attracts people that actually don't just play, but they also run and then they create games. Essentially, the idea is have a plan when you're making a game and stick to it. So that game doesn't have to be the omni game. It needs to do what it's supposed to do. So it sounds like if you guys, just by dint of you having these pillars and really trying to stick to it, then you're going to have a throughput throughout the entire thing. And that's going to give the game a feel. So you're doing D20, which means, if I will guess, it's a combat-oriented game. And from what I understand with Final Fantasy, it's generally combat-oriented. You know, you're going to the thing and you have to run through the bosses and whatnot.
We have that set up, but we do not have experience. We went milestone based because I wanted the rate of progression to be something that is controlled by the table in more than anything else.
When you say by the table, do you mean the GM?
Yes.
Right, so that's OSR.
So the other thing,
just gonna keep on.
is when it comes to I know it. I said it's using D20, but the thing is, as I said before, you couldn't take like a AD&D style fighter and put it within our system. Not do it straight. I'm not really interested in doing that sort of cross compatibility. It is a case of we're trying to do this particular thing, and that is the end of it. If somebody wants to run like a war game within my system, I'm not interested in doing war game like design with this. If you want to make that yourself, have at it. Don't expect me to do it, because that was never the goal with the game. That was never the interest.
How does it deviate from? I mean, the idea of D20 for people that don't know is what?
It is roll a 20-sided die, add the modifiers, compare it to difficulty. That part has not changed. That part has not changed. Everything around it is what is going to be different.
You mean the classes?
I mean the classes. I mean the races. I mean magic. I mean feats.
Yeah. Feats are an interesting idea. Magic is something I would be, just as a game creator, I'm very interested in knowing how you guys did. I'm assuming it's spells, but as in D&D like spells, or effects or whatever.
It is spells.
And that's a very Final Fantasy thing, you know. I mean, like, and it happens.
When it comes to feats, the idea was they are little tricks that you can customize your character with. They are not. We don't have a whole lot of feat chains. We don't have the idea of feat taxes. We even have all of the feats categorized into different categories. So you don't have like in third edition, that you don't have that problem of, oh, is this a fighter bonus feat or not? No, furthermore, if in some splat in the future we added new feats, each of those feats would specifically list what category it's in.
Right.
We do have, when it comes to magic, we do have slots per se, but they are more like equipment slots rather than the whole preparing your spell and then using a slot to cast. That's not what we're doing, because that's only been in that kind of charge-based spell casting has only been in Final Fantasy like twice. The majority of them are going to be using an MP system.
Right, as in magic points.
Mm-hmm.
So you have so many points, and I mean, 3rd edition tried to mess with that. At least 3.5 did. I don't know.
Yeah, but it wasn't built around it from the get-go. So
it's very crunchy too in 3rd edition, and no one I played with actually did it right.
And so, I'm aware of these. I'm very aware of the casting problem. I've talked with people who play tested for 3rd, and the fact that if you gave anything to the martial characters, some of the casters would because they're like, you guys are stepping on our toes. And I'm like, motherfucker, you're stepping on everybody's toes.
Yeah.
Even with that, there are certain exceptions to the whole spell slot thing. The big one is blue magic, because blue mages, since they had their appearance in 5, have fallen into the idea of weird, varied types of magic that you have to get hit with in order to learn.
I actually don't know what blue mages are.
Blue mages are the wizards that went to the west and Tolkien,
to the east
or east.
Yeah,
yeah.
They stopped the other people from getting further into the other big bad. And I was disappointed just to break us out of this moment. Just for a second, I was disappointed in the Rings of Power that was Gandalf and not a blue wizard. But go ahead.
Should have been a blue wizard.
Yeah, should have been.
I have not seen Rings of Power. I do not acknowledge Rings of Power.
Yeah, don't look at it. I mean, I like it, but I
if
like
they changed
watching
the names,
things.
I'd have been okay with it. I'd have been like, oh, it's a show. But just either don't call it Lord of the Rings, I'd be fine, or just make it not Galadriel, because it's not Galadriel. I'm not gonna waste time with something that I already know is gonna be low quality. I don't go out of my way to watch Asylum movies when I already know what the result's gonna be.
Well, I wouldn't call it low quality. I mean, they spent a lot of money on that stuff, and the production value was great. I think the storytelling
People spent a lot of money on Heaven's Gate too.
Yeah, and the storytelling wasn't like terrible. I mean, I think it flows as a story, whether or not it connects to Lord of the Rings. That we'll leave that alone. But it does tell a compelling story that is in of itself interesting, I think. If you
I think the wordplay of compelling is correct. It's
if you let go
compelling you to like it, or else you're a Nazi.
If you let go of the idea that it's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, if you don't like it, you're a bad person.
No, compelling is in. Yeah, compelling is, and we're all allowed to tell our own stories. Like that's where I am compelled to say that they were playing their role-playing game, and that's what happened.
Yeah,
you play your role-playing game, and you whatever it is that you have happens too.
If I stop appropriating my fantasy.
Here, everyone is entitled to their role-playing game, but they're not entitled to tell me how I'm supposed to think about it.
Right.
So
exactly.
If I look at something, I think this has the vibe of being low quality. Then I'm not going to be interested in delving further. No, it doesn't matter how much money is spent or how hard someone worked on it. I mean,
Fair.
I had a bit. I'll get on a brief tangent. I had a bit of a thing where people were in a group I was in were discussing the worst movie that they had ever seen. And people were bringing up some of the easy contenders, and then I bring in Inchon, a movie so bad that the universe has tried its absolute hardest to forget that it ever existed, and never got any sort of home release. The only way to watch it is on YouTube.
What is the name of that film again? Because I have to see it now.
Inchon, or when a full-on cult tried to make a war film.
How do you spell that?
Inchon.
I don't think I've heard of it.
1981. Does that seem right? Oh, that's a whole thing.
I got nothing.
Yeah, it was made by the infamous Unification Church, which is a whole other can of worms.
It's saying it's a documentary. It's the war in Korea, story of the effect of war on a group of people where I didn't read fast enough. It's Axis and Allies suddenly. I'm sorry.
So, Mildra, we do need to get to your game a little bit because we got about 30 minutes.
Yeah. You might want to have it stop playing the audio.
Uh-oh. How does it go?
Is the audio happening? Oh, it is. Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for
So getting into things. When we designed this, we ended up looking at pretty much every Final Fantasy that's been around since 1987 and looking at what notes we can take from each. Because again, I wanted that if I'm going to have this be something that could apply to the whole franchise, then I have to do my proper research. Like if I was, and part of the reason I go into that kind of detail is, one of my favorite Star Trek stories is that of Harv Bennett. He was the producer for Wrath of Khan. And when he stepped onto the role, which he got mostly because he knew how to maintain a budget, and TMP went massively over budget. He had not seen any Star Trek before that. So in preparation, he went through the entire original series and took notes.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, that's the minimum of what I need to do if I'm going to be doing this right.
Yeah, sure. You got to know it.
I got to know it. And it wasn't just looking at the games, but looking at things like cut content, looking at interviews, looking at Q&As, looking at behind-the-scenes documentaries. We did a lot of research. And because especially when you're looking at game development, there's a lot of stuff that gets left on the cutting room floor. A lot of stuff that's tooled around with, but ultimately abandoned. You have that same kind of thing in film, but because there's more moving parts in a video game in some cases than a film, you're gonna have a whole lot of stuff that gets cut, especially when you're dealing with a multi-hour RPG.
Sure.
And to that end, the approach that we had was throw a bunch of stuff on the wall that we might keep, and then gradually narrow it down. And this included some jobs that we had considered, but ultimately shot down. The big one was the Puppet Master. That was one of the jobs that we had. It made its debut in Final Fantasy XI. But by the time we actually got to writing out how that would work, we realized everything that we could do with it was done by a different job, so we cut it.
Yeah.
And to that end, I should note a couple of things. When it comes to character creation, the most important, aside from your ability modifiers, we don't have ability scores, just straight modifiers. Your race and
I don't understand that. What?
We don't have ability scores. You're not rolling your ability scores. You have a set of modifiers you're assigning.
You mean you have +1s and minuses versus?
Yeah.
a 12 and a 15 and whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I think you have the 12s and the 15s, and for anyone who's watching, it's in typical games, you would have like strength, dexterity, whatever, and then you would roll for those numbers, and then they would translate into modifiers. So how do you guys get those numbers for your abilities or your attributes?
You have three packages, 3 sets that have a set of 6 modifiers that you would apply to the 6 abilities.
And what are the abilities?
Vigor, agility, vitality, mind, spirit, and persona.
So renamed attributes.
Yeah.
Okay.
You
Is
pick
magic spirit?
It can be. It ultimately depends on class. I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
There are 3 packages that you pick from that have a set of modifiers: generalist, specialist, and versatile. And that determines the 6 modifiers that you would assign.
I dig that. Yeah.
Generalist is +1s all the way down.
Right. You're Mario.
Specialist is 1 ability gets +3, 2 of them get +2, and 3 of them get -1.
That's interesting.
And versatile is 3 of them get +2, 2 of them get 0, 1 of them gets -1.
That's an interesting way. I'm sure that it's just my ignorance speaking, but I haven't seen that before.
I think there was one project that didn't fully finish that introduced the idea, and I just did my own spin on it.
I dig that.
Now
Imperial Dragon is in the chat, by the way.
Yeah, I do. I see him.
Yeah, he says Khan.
Now, after that, of course, is going to be your choice of race, and there's 3 things that you're going to get from your choice of race. You're going to get a +1 to one of 2 ability modifiers. So if you're picking, say, dwarf, you choose either vitality or persona and get a +1 in that. You also get a origin skill. Instead of skill points, we have 3 degrees of skill training: untrained, trained, and origin. And it basically determines how quickly it develops based on your level. So for the dwarf, they get orienteering as an origin skill. You're only get the primary way that you're going to get origin level training is through your race. There are other ways, but that's the main way you're going to get it. Basically, this is the skill that you are the most familiar with. And I should know we only have like 7 skills because I didn't want a bloated ass skill list.
Yeah, that's a good move.
And the third thing that you get is a bonus feat from one of 3 categories. It's not that you get 1 bonus feat from each of those categories. You pick one of those 3 categories, pick 1 feat in that category, and you get that right out of the gate.
Are feats essentially just ways of cheating, like in D&D or in typical D20? Here are the rules. This is what you have to follow. Oh, you have a feat. You get to break that rule.
Not necessarily. They are tricks. They're little tricks, little ways to customize that don't fit within anything that you would get in classes.
Just extra stuff.
Yeah. And the three categories that you can pick for dwarf are equipment, environment, or skill.
Well, I have a question real quick. For the races, you'd mentioned this sort of dichotomy between Western fantasy and Eastern fantasy, and I'm sure there's other fantasies. What's a dwarf? What are the races? And I'm going to throw it back over to Ken because I have to get the door really quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, can you explain the races at all?
All of the races that we took are ones that have shown up in the video games in one form or another. And it's their appearance in those games that we built around instead of what's considered common tropes. So someone can't go into the dwarf that we have and necessarily expect the same kind of dwarf that you would see in a Tolkien-esque affair. And in fact, when I commissioned the art for the dwarf, I specifically said I didn't want anything that would look like that or look like a D&D dwarf. The reference material that I had sent my artist was trench uniforms, like World War I trench uniforms.
So it looks like you have androids. You've got, because that's a Final Fantasy thing. Banga.
Yes.
I'm gonna say this wrong. Burmisian.
Yep.
And then they're dwarves. Elysian. Hume. Mithra. Mughal. There's like so many. I know I'm murdering. I feel like I'm murdering your entire sex of races and your things. Rogadin.
Yep.
How do you say that?
Rogadin. You got it right.
Oh, Ronso.
Yep.
Taratu. I mean, they're really. It's interesting. Taratu. Varg. Viera. A lot of different races that you've added to the story that I'm sure people who are fans of Final Fantasy enjoy being able to play in the realm of role playing, which is gotta be helpful. I very much enjoyed Final Fantasy as a world. In playing it, why did you decide to go deep into Final Fantasy's lore and world building?
Well, obviously, there's the fact that I've been a fan of the franchise since I was little. And there was also the fact that I had played through several other people's attempts at doing Final Fantasy in TTRPG form, going all the way back to the Returners project in the mid-90s. And a lot of this was me wanting to take what had come before and do my own spin on the concept with a far more specific goal in mind, which is why I brought up the whole pillars thing earlier. But also, I wanted to explore what I felt was the soul of FF that I felt a lot of people were misinterpreting. The soul of FF is not high medieval fantasy. The soul of it is iteration and experimentation. And as a case in point, the creator of the franchise had said that he did not feel that it needed to be limited to just video game RPGs, that Final Fantasy could be novels if one so chose. If his successors who would be working on the game so chose to do so. And because of that, we built everything with that goal of we are not creating a specific world. We are creating a sandbox for any table that picks this up to use that as the basis to create their world. And incidentally, that made writing things kind of tricky because we needed to write descriptions that were evocative, but weren't specifically tied to any specific world. And that is not an easy feat. But it was something that we felt we had to do.
It's an interesting concept. I mean, One of the things that I've noticed as a person who enjoys being a character in role playing games, developing the character style and having a background is so important to like being able to act out who you are. And I think that mythos, bringing that history and bringing the background and the world setting is and the mythos and all of that you bring in is really important to world building and to immersive playing, because as far as I can tell in your long history of like you go deep and the content that you create and you're earnestly, you believe in building that reality, and so I think that that gives us like a reality to be in, even though it's pretend and fantasy and stuff like that, but that it's sometimes that reinforcement allows us to feel like we're in a place, and that's where the joy comes from. I don't know if I'm oversimplifying this, but
no, I get it.
I don't know that much about Final Fantasy or certainly, like, I know that you go very deep into a lot of your podcasts. You go very deep into the specifics of why things are and how they relate to everything that they relate to. It seems like that's something that you've built, that you have kind of built as a worldview, as a podcaster, that you go into specifics and you go into the details, and those details are so incredibly important of like understanding the history and the why, and what drives you to create that kind of infrastructure and the world that you create. I mean, why is that important to you?
I think it's because in order to learn, it's important to have an understanding of what works, what doesn't, and why. I grew up around a lot of folk who encouraged a very detail-based, a very scientific way of thinking. My grandfather taught high school physics, and a lot of time in a lot of methods of research, it's what someone feels is not as important as what they can demonstrate and what they can consistently demonstrate, and breaking down how that actually works. There was also the fact that I was very frustrated with the low bar when it came to reviews of different forms of media, where someone would use a certain buzzword and then act like that was all that they needed to say. Like they would call a game too linear, but they wouldn't explain, okay, what makes it too linear, so people can know, okay, what to avoid in the future. I've talked about my love for Vincent Flanders and his site Web Pages That Suck, where he's showing bad web design as a means to teach good web design. These kind of things laid the groundwork for the approach that I wanted to take as a commentator, as an entertainer and the like, because I know that someone is going to look at one of my reviews and that is going to play a factor in their purchasing power. And if that's going to be the case, then I would rather they be as informed as I'm able to have them be informed, so that they are not judging it based on misleading information, or they end up passing up on something because I didn't give the proper context.
Yeah, I think you've gone deeper than the actual game creators potentially. I mean, they probably had some stats, they had some math that they kind of filled out of like, oh, this character is going to interact in this way based off of some math. But you've gone in and added descriptions and gone into some very real depth of like the history, the lore, and made it a way to be immersive and to feel like you're doing it right. Mm-hmm. Where from the storytellers and the creators of Final Fantasy and the video games that I have exposure to, you just kind of walk through and interact the way that the story unfolds and stuff like that.
Well, something you need to keep in mind is the RPG experience in a video game context, in a tabletop context, are two different mediums, and they are going to have different demands, and I have to be mindful of that. Much in the same way that a novel writer is not going to be as good as writing a movie script as a script writer. They are completely different disciplines.
That's a good point, and it's actually an errant thought that I had earlier. The idea of, people when they see Final Fantasy, they're likely their introduction to it, I mean, the entirety of it pretty much is console games, right? So as a TTRPG, like, what are you trying to emulate? Are you attempting to emulate playing a Final Fantasy game, or are you trying to...
I'm trying to emulate the soul of the franchise.
Right,
and
so it's a different experience.
And using that as the starting point. That's why I stated that it isn't about the ones that I just happen to like.
It's interesting because I'd say I don't know if it'd be a criticism or not, but one of the reasons that I kind of got out of video games when I was younger is because I didn't want to be spoon-fed all of the plot and all of the stories. To role play is just to take on the mantle of whatever it is. It doesn't necessarily mean you give someone a personality, right? So like very, very old school, like I don't want to say old school, first gaming TTRPGs, you're playing the barbarian. You don't really even need a name. You are playing literally just that, it's like you're playing the CEO, you're playing the marketing guy. It's like a job. That's a role-playing game. But we sort of slide into this idea of giving the character life. And when I do a console game, I might greatly empathize with the character, but I don't feel like the character. Like, and I'm not really making decisions, There
have been some strides in that, and there's also the demands of a video game are not going to be the demands of a TTRPG. That's why I brought up that whole script writing is not going to be the same thing as novel writing.
Right.
There are benefits that you have in and this applies to any sort of cross medium work. Like I am well aware that there are going to be certain things that are that are going to be on the cutting room floor when adapting a novel into a film or into a television series.
Right.
Because pacing and immersion is something that you have a different kind of control over in, say, a film versus a novel. Like a novel, the pacing is largely left up to the reader. You can read a little bit, read a lot, read the whole thing in one go. It's up to whoever's reading it. In a film, you don't really have that same luxury. And that is something that a filmmaker, the scriptwriter, and all that have to account for. That you can something that might take a long amount of time in a book can be summarized in a single shot in a film. This is one of the big examples I use for this sort of thing is the film adaptation of Cormac McArthur's The Road, where they played it as 100% straight as possible, and that ended up making the film not work. Because the book is very much built around atmosphere and mood making, and trying to play that.
I said that's how I roll too. Atmosphere.
Trying to do that straight without adapting to the necessities of being a film results in a film that doesn't have a whole lot of momentum.
It's interesting. This is a bit of a tangent, but I think it draws Ken into this very heavily mechanical TTRPG conversation. The adaptation of Dune. Ken, did you see either part 1 or 2 of Dune?
I saw both. I was disappointed in both, but I read the books.
Well, Frank Herbert probably would be too.
Yeah, but Frank Herbert was an asshole to Iron Maiden when they were trying to be nice to him. So mulligan.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, even Lord of the Rings, like there were at least 2 attempts at adapting Lord of the Rings to screen, and I love Frodo of the Nine Fingers, right? I dig that shit, but is it good? I mean, I'm going along with what you're saying.
Yeah. You can make the closest adaptation you want, but at the end of the day, it still has to work as, say, a film.
So when I'm playing this game of yours, which you refuse to run for us for some reason.
Yeah, we would totally play it.
Yeah, we want to play it, so
I'm ready.
Would love you to actually.
Yeah, well, I'm until I feel it is ready enough for that kind of thing, I'm not going to do it.
Right on.
Right now, what you see is a vertical slice, basically a statement of intent that this is something that we're not just saying that we're working on. No, we are actually working on it, and we have something tangible to show that this isn't just us talking.
I get it.
Yeah, and I mean, I like Final Fantasy. I'm a fan of Final Fantasy. I like my
that's the bomb.
My Discord name is based on Final Fantasy II. DJ No Fly is 5 characters, which is the amount of characters that you could rename your Cecil character or from Final Fantasy II.
What I'm trying to get, what I'm trying to say is, so let's say I'm coming at your game, and I'm like, all right, so it's Final Fantasy. I want to play in a Final Fantasy game. Okay, well, I could do that in a lot of different settings, or a lot of different systems. And honestly, I think the best one would be D6. And if you want to do horror, I would say D100. And if you want to do straight up combat, then D20 is the easiest for people. So I'm actually throwing at you, Mildra, a very, very similar question that you threw at me about 3 years ago. You motherfucker!
Holding it on.
When I'm coming to your game, what am I looking for? Yes, setting, but like, why am I playing it?
The reason to play something like this is is the creation of a Final Fantasy-like campaign that does not require one to be slavish to existing material.
But it is not setting agnostic, correct? It is the Final Fantasy-esque setting.
No, it is setting agnostic. I didn't write a setting. I didn't write.
I see. So the rules work the way that it should have the feel of a Final Fantasy game.
Yeah,
but there's no setting.
No, the setting is going to be up to the table. That is the reason why we use the term sandbox and why we also use the term blue bucket of Legos.
I would really love you to. I'm gonna be kind. I'd really love for you to run. Now, I'm not saying right now. At some point in the near future, run an encounter just to give us and people that watch a little taste of what the fuck that means. Because I understand it. I get it. There's a feeling in the system. A lot of people disagree with this. And there's lots of arguments about the system even matters. So I think
I'm in the system matters camp.
Absolutely 100%. I think so. But people have got to see it.
Now, furthermore, there have been recurring element. The reason why we went the agnostic route is because Final Fantasy has dipped into many different subgenres over the decades. Sometimes it's been high fantasy. Sometimes it's been steampunk. Sometimes it's been modern diesel punk. Sometimes it's leaned into science fantasy. Sometimes it has leaned into noir. It has been these different subgenres of storytelling, and I would rather have the genre in question that a given table is using to be up to that table, and I'm just providing the bricks in that blue bucket of Legos for them to build something in a freestyle manner.
Okay, maybe this will explain something that I'm getting at. Describe to me, what is a Final Fantasy style campaign?
I think it's the chocobo.
Without going into setting.
Without going into setting, there are certain recurring elements. The names of various spells, the names of the summons. Sometimes they're called eidolons or aeons or whatnot. The presence of crystals, the presence of various forms of good and evil, the presence of someone named Sid, the recurring races, the recurring jobs and whatnot. Those parts are crucial, and those parts are part of the bricks when it comes to the sandbox that we create.
Yeah, it sounds like you have an IP that people that are into it are going to understand, those nuances. And through playing it, I think people can start to get the feeling of, look, why is that different than, a D&D game? Because typically, there's a system, there's a setting people can understand, like a horror setting, versus, this system is using these mechanics. But you're talking about something kind of meta. It's interesting you went with D20. I do understand that Final Fantasy is a turn-based,
I went with a D20 because I did not want to waffle about what the proper core mechanic was going to be, because I wanted something straightforward and to the point, and the complexity is more in the customization, more in the stuff around that core mechanic rather than the core mechanic itself.
Yeah, no, I get that. You get into levels and whatnot.
We do have some stuff in the advanced rules that does not necessarily tie in with levels, but I'm not going to get into that.
Honestly,
now,
man, go on.
I'd say one of the things that is really going to set things apart from, say, a D&D like character is the fact that we have classes and jobs. Now, the job system got its debut in the original Final Fantasy III, not the one that you guys played back on the SNES. At least in the States. Keep in mind, up until 7, there was a different numbering convention. So what was 2 here in the States was actually 4, and what was 3 in the States was actually 6. The job system started in 3 and has had different refinements over the years. We have classes, but your choice of class, which we only have 4 of them, warrior, expert, mage, and adept, are chassis. They mainly determine how you develop your HP, your MP, and how many skills you have trained. And this is usually tied to the attributes. It also determines what attributes are going to be key in physical and magical combat.
Can you cross class?
We have it built where multi-classing is kind of ingrained. It's almost mandatory. Now,
I mean, do you spec your characters like you do in Final Fantasy games?
We have a certain way on how you spec, and I'm getting to that.
Okay.
So, like I said, the 4 main classes are essentially a broad chassis. Filling that in is where the job system comes in. Each job is essentially a track of features separated into 7 tiers known as circles.
So it's beyond warrior, expert, mage, adept, and
each of the 4 classes has a series of jobs that is associated with it. You are picking 3 jobs. At least one of them has to be associated with your class, and assigning them either a slow, medium, or fast rate.
Give it bartender, barista. Sorry, go on.
Your choice of these. Your choice of whether or not you put it at your choice of the 3 jobs, whether you put them at fast, medium, or slow, determines what level you get what circle of abilities. Like for your fast, you're getting these circle abilities at 1st, 3rd, 6th, 9th, 12th, 15th, and 18th.
I did.
For medium, you're getting your first circle at 1st, but the remaining ones are 4th, 7th, 10th, 13th, 16th, and 19th. And for slow, you're getting it at 2nd, 5th, 8th, 11th, 14th, 17th, and 20th. So there's a 3-level stagger, but at every level, you're getting something from your 3 jobs.
This does feel like 3rd, in a way. Like I see that you'd mentioned legends before, and I see that kernel in there, which is interesting. Now, that's interesting.
The thing is that when you're picking your 3 jobs, you can pick any of the jobs that are available, but at least one of them has to be associated with your class. And as an example, the warrior class, its associated jobs are berserker, dervish, dragoon, fencer, fighter, knight, monk, samurai, sentinel, sniper, and weapon master.
Oh damn!
Each of them. In addition, there's a set of jobs that are referred to as independent jobs. These are not associated with any particular class, and have a little bit higher of a skill floor. So they are the equivalent of prestige classes.
Right.
You can pick them right out of the gate, but we generally advise people to not go with them at their first go, because they are a little bit more complex than some of the other ones.
have you play tested this?
We have been doing a fair amount. We have been doing a fair amount of play testing and refining. But
What? Go on.
to use a example of how these combinations can work. Since Cecil was brought up earlier, I'll use him. If someone were to do Cecil in our game, it would probably be an adept and use as the class, and use the jobs Paladin, Dark Knight, and Sentinel. So essentially,
what level?
Huh?
What level?
Any.
So the reason I say is, for example, in 5th edition, nobody wants to play, or very few people want to play first level, right? So, or like in Numenera, for example, like nobody wants to play the first tier, or whatever it's called.
I like
Numenera is
getting
cool,
hit by a
but nobody likes
door
first level.
and then dying and then starting
Numenera
again.
is. I haven't played the 5e takes on Numenera. I'm only familiar with the Cipher system. Numenera doesn't have a level system in the same way.
Well, you have 6 levels, and
you have tiers. They're not levels.
Okay. They're levels.
Not in the same way as what you're thinking.
What's the difference?
The difference is it's not a case of you level up and you get this one thing. Each tier is getting a package of an expanding toolkit.
I mean, okay. I do. There is obviously a difference. I will relinquish that. There's obviously a difference, but it's still a way of orchestrating D20 levels. Like, you have more control of how you spec between your tiers. When you get to a certain experience point, you gain an ability point, you gain an edge, you gain a whatever, and then you go to the next tier. Like, I mean, the Monty Cook is pretty obvious about this stuff. He takes 20 levels and squishes it down to whatever it needs to be.
Yeah.
What my point is this: we can argue that till the cows come home. The idea of, when people play Numenera, rarely do they want to play a starting character because you're kind of shit. As in, the game isn't fun at 1. You want to play at least a tier 2 or a tier 3 character. 5th edition, you can play at least 3rd level, maybe 5th or 6th, because you're actually starting to get some nuance from the classes and the levels and all this stuff.
It sounds like your concern is that your starting kit is limited at first.
No, I don't have a concern. I'm asking you, from your playtesting, how does the game shape out, and how many levels are there, and all that good stuff?
There are 20 levels, and we have no plans or intentions on expanding that level cap.
So your Black Lotus is a Black Lotus always. I get it. There'll never be any more.
Don't ever talk about the Black Lotus in front of me.
Don't ever talk about the Black Lotus.
Just don't do it.
Mildra, we want you to run the game for us. We want you to run an encounter. That way we'll understand.
But to further go in, because with the examples that you gave about people not wanting to play like first tier in Numenera, and by extension the Cipher system, or play first level in D&D 5e. In both of those cases, you have instances where the kit is essentially the options that someone has is very, very small, and in worst case scenario ends up being a one-trick pony. In the one-trick pony thing was something that we specifically wanted to avoid, and because of the way we have things set up, that one-trick pony is virtually impossible to do. Because of the fact that at the very least you're getting the first circle ability from 2 of your 3 jobs. And
I see.
I will continue to use Cecil as an example. Let's say you picked as your fast and medium Dark Knight and Sentinel. You know, because early on you started as Dark Knight before becoming a Paladin. So first off, Dark Knight, that is an adept associated job. At first circle, you get the first tier version of Soul Eater, which allows you to add one die type from D4 to D12 to an attack's damage. But after that attack's resolved, you take HP. You take HP reduction to whatever that extra die rolled. So if you're doing D10 damage and you use Soul Eater to add an additional D10, whatever that second D10 rolled, you're taking that in HP reduction. You also get Dark Armament. Your weapon is always considered to have the shadow element. Now, with Sentinel, that is a warrior associated job. There are three things that you're getting out of Sentinel. First off, you're getting Sentinel Technique at tier 1, which allows you to reduce the damage die for your weapon attacks to give yourself a bonus to defense. This is a one round thing, and it is based on how many steps down you go. So if you go from if you have your damage go from D8 to D4, you're getting a +4 bonus. Second thing you get is the Overwatch point resource. You get an Overwatch point anytime a damage die from weapons, from one of your attacks, rolls a natural 1. The Overwatch points are capped at what your physical combat modifier is, which if you have Adept, you're picking one of the first three as that. You know how in some games, like strength is always used for melee attacks or dexterity is always used for ranged attacks and so on?
Right.
We divorced that with the idea of the physical and magical combat modifiers. What those are is determined by your class. So if you pick warrior, for example, your physical combat modifier is basically your vigor modifier.
Versus adept or a mage or something would be your spirit or something.
For mage, it is either it can be either vigor or agility, and for the magical combat, it is either mind or spirit, and you would make that choice at character creation. And actually, I have to correct myself because I was using an old.
I understand, dude. You read a book, you write several variations. There's 300,000 words. Yeah, I get it.
But we wanted to avoid God stats as much as we could. So, and yeah, because of that, even when it comes to things like skills, there's the modifier for a skill is the higher between one of two potential abilities.
Is that a D&D? I don't mean to always put it on D&D, but I remember, or is that a legend thing? There's some game where you can choose the higher of two abilities.
13th Age did it.
Was it D&D Next? 13H.
Oh, it wasn't D&D Next. I was there for D&D Next.
This is an aside. I think D&D Next was better than 5th edition, by the way.
Oh, I'm not just the earlier versions where they seem to be onto something.
It was really fun, and when Monty Cook was a part of it, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Then he got ran off for whatever reason.
Yeah. Aside, I think D&D Next.
Point is,
by the way.
Oh, things like dexterity being used for a bunch of different things compared to strength or constitution.
Right.
That was something we wanted to avoid.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's difficult to really have a dump stat within the system, or have it that there's a certain stat that's used as the dump. And this is, we had at one point considered rolling for abilities, but we decided not to because we wanted people to make the choices on how they're going to build things rather than
Right.
Rather than full
your
randomizer.
character is kind of part of the whole Final Fantasy thing too.
Again, customization is king.
Yeah.
We wanted people to make the choice of what they're putting stuff in, instead of it being left to chance. Now, to get back to Sentinel, the third thing that you get is a set of Overwatch techniques, which are special moves that the Sentinel has access to. You get a number of them based on your physical combat modifier. And a lot of them are built around support because the Sentinel is a very defensive-minded character. The whole thing with them is gimping their attacks to boost their defense until they can start getting aggressive. So because of the fact that you have those two sets of abilities, those two sets of features right out of the gate, you have different options to go with. So the idea of a one-trick pony just isn't really a thing here.
Yeah, I see what you guys have done. I mean, it's interesting. It's definitely something like the system definitely requires a certain play style and mindset. And for people that like a little bit of crunch, maybe even a lot of crunch, I can see them really digging into it. I really get that third edition feel from it, which is fun. It's fun to make a character and kind of see it work. And people that play console, Final Fantasy, or even, I mean, it's much simpler, but Baldur's Gate type games, it's cool to get to the next level and be able to get like the new specs, points, and etc., and be able to do cool shit. Okay, so this is a pretty good rundown of the system. We've got about 5 minutes left. What do you want to leave us with what you have of the system, and where's it going to go? And Ken, do you have any questions?
So, as far as how things are going, we're currently in the middle of refining and updating some things based on feedback. Once that's done, we're going to be putting the thing up. We're going to be putting that updated version not on the Sage link. That was something that was for that particular thing, that particular expo. Sage stands for Sonic Amateur Games Expo. This is technically the first TTRPG to be showcased at that. Once that 1.0 is out, then we're going to start working on a 1.1, which is going to include the advanced rules. This is where we're going to be putting in things like materia, things like the sphere grid, as well as an item synthesis system that is not going to work exactly the way you might think looking at other games and how they do item creation. We have a much simpler approach, and a much more modular approach to the design. And in the future beyond that, I am working on a splat that I'm calling the Ultimania Guide as a nod to the Ultimania series of strategy guides for the video games. And that's going to include some stuff that I didn't feel would quite fit within the core book.
Right. Ken, did you have any questions for Mildra?
I think it's wild that you've gone into this depth. I mean, I feel like there's definitely a niche market, and Final Fantasy was one of the more popular games out there for a long time, and it's massive, the people who have played all of the games. And I'm not sure what version the video game is up to, but I know it's
16.
probably in six. I was going to say it's a teenager at this point.
That's not accounting for all the side games over the last 30 years.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a world that they have created, and but the because you've created this kind of lore and history and ability to delve deeper in this way, I know that the cosplay alone for people who go to gaming conventions and stuff like that, just the live aspect of it, to get some kind of deeper lore and history for that set and setting has got to be a real resource. And I think it's I'm going to look deeper into it, but I think it's wild that you've created and gone to the depth that you've gone to in this game that you've produced.
Ethereal Dragon says yokai looks fun. You channel a summoning with it.
Yeah. Yokai was an interesting case. That was something that I ended up creating kind of on accident.
And I agree with Ken too on this. Like, it's pretty wild. You guys have gone into such detail with Final Fantasy. I mean, it's a massive franchise.
Yeah, but I go into the same amount. I go into no less depth with this than I do when I'm doing my interviews or any other the work that I do on the channel. And it's taken me a very long time to grasp the fact that the level of detail I go into is an exception and not the norm. Especially when it comes to the interviews I've done over the years. Because I have a lot of people who said that I ask very detailed questions. And I'm like, for the longest time, I was like, I figured that's just the baseline that one is expected to ask. Is those questions that are going in depth on the subject matter. Then
you come back, Ken's gonna lay into you. Run the game for us, and we're gonna throw down.
Yeah,
awesome.
I definitely would like to play. I wouldn't know where to start, so I definitely need your guidance.
It'd be an interesting play test.
I don't know the voice for the yokai. Like how do the yokai sound? I'm gonna presume that they don't sound like someone from New Orleans or Canada.
They do if the table says
Canada.
They do.
Like I'm not Canada or Minnesota. Those people.
I'm not overly. That kind of thing is something I would rather leave in the hands of the table than me say what those things are supposed to sound like. Because again, that goes into that whole agnosticism. Like again, we are presenting that blue bucket of Legos and telling people make something with this that is unquestionably you and your table. Personalize it for your table, not for the way I think things should be played. Because once somebody has the book in their hands and are running things, I don't give a shit. I'm not their dad.
Yeah, it's their game at that point. They have created the world, and I think one of the wonderful things that you've done is you've given them a lot of resources to build that world with some accuracy and accountability, because I think that's where you're coming from, is you are giving an accountability, a reality to this imaginary world. There's certainly a lot of mathematics for the video game involved, but you're giving a culture to a world that you've kind of inferred from the world that they've built and resource to participate in that world.
Yeah, down the road I want to run like themed game jams. I've tooled around with the idea of taking the prompts that have been used for things like Sword Timber and say, okay, use the weapon and magic item creation system to create a series of swords just based on these keywords. And all I do is just give the keyword, like say the keyword is fire, and then say, okay, make a weapon based on that keyword. And that's it.
All right, so I have to cut us off a little bit because I have to bounce. Last words, Mildra, an aphorism, a joke, something to leave us with.
Fuck Harmony Gold.
Well, I was not expecting that. Just go for it. Just anything, anything you want to say.
I love it. Mildred, thank you so much for joining us. We demand you come back and run an encounter with something prepared. But we would actually like to play your game. I would kill for someone to say this to me about my game. So I would like you to come and run your game for us if you want to. If not, it's fine. You're always welcome on GGP.
Yeah, I thank you for having me. I enjoy being had.
And we can definitely go down the rabbit hole for game theory and
just quick. we three will talk about some Star Trek. It's going to happen.
We have. I mean, I think our last podcast with Mildra went for like 6 hours.
I think it was 7 hours.
Was it 7 hours?
Yeah, this dude's a marathon runner. He can rock and roll.
Just it's happening. It's all happening. But
all right, you want to lead us out, Ken?
Well, I want to say I think we have links for this Final Fantasy in our
chat.
And well, no, in the whatever you call it, in the YouTube description, as well as if you want to find out more information about the Geeky Gamer podcast hosted by Ken and Bill, you can do that by watching this video that has happened for the last 2 hours. If you have any questions about the music by all lowercase letters and Mr. Interrupt, you can do that by searching them on Google. The Couchfire Media brought us the media that we watched in 12 Replay Productions. They did all that other stuff. Thanks, Mildra, for being our guest. And thank you for creating and going into depth of Final Fantasy and bringing us a little bit more into the lore and all of that fun stuff. So tune in next week when we'll do this again. For sure.
All right. See you guys. Peace.